Texas Governor and Republican presidential candidate Rick Perry campaigned in New Hampshire today, saying President Obama isn't doing enough to create jobs. He spoke at a Politics and Eggs breakfast in Bedford, a regular stop for presidential candidates. This is 40 Minutes.
And to all of you, a very cheery good morning. It is, as we were walking in, what a fabulous day. I don't think it's this way in Texas. The heat may be a little bit higher, Alex, in Texas. So right now you all are really blessed to have this beautiful weather, and it's certainly good to be with you. And this Politics and Eggs is an intriguing idea, to say the least. And Governor Merrill, I just want to say thank you for coming. You really honor us. And Dr. Merrill, I want to say to you, thank you for, let me set that right down here. I know I'm going to need a little of this before we're all done. But I want to say thanks to you for your son's service. Dr. Merrill has a United States Marine who's been serving us in Afghanistan, and one of the reasons we're here today to have the great freedoms that we do are young men like yours. So thank you again. As has already been said, I'm blessed to be traveling with my wife and actually our Griffin's wife and our daughter, but they're a little bit of sleepyheads this morning, so we gave them a little bit of the day off to catch up and rest a little bit. But we've got great respect for this state and your first in the nation primary. I'm going to be here a lot. And I'm going to be campaigning, I think the right word is with fervor. You're going to see me a lot. You're going to see me engaging often in New Hampshire, and particularly just coming and sitting and listening, but also trying to answer Granite Staters' questions about what we see as some of the big issues that face this country. I love any state that doesn't have a personal income tax. I mean, so, and I'm kind of jealous of you that you don't have a sales tax either. So that really makes a huge difference. And I'll talk a little bit about your economy as a whole, but live free or die. I mean, you got to love that. I mean, it's remindful of a little place down in Texas called the Alamo that people were willing to sacrifice for the freedoms that they hold so dear. People have asked me, said, why are you running for president? And I'm straight up about it. I'm running for president because I want to get America working again. That's what we need to be doing in this country, is working. Our nation cannot endure another 4 years of rising unemployment, rising taxes, rising debt. Of course, now we're told we're in a recovery. Sure doesn't feel like a recovery. And I know it doesn't feel like a recovery to those 9% of Americans who are unemployed, the millions more who can't find a job, those that are having to work full-time, or those that have just absolutely quit looking. It doesn't feel like a recovery to them. 1 in 6 work-eligible Americans cannot find a full-time job. That is not a recovery. That is an economic disaster. Monday, President Obama said that he had reversed the recession, gotten the economy moving back again, but over the last 6 months, he had run into a little bad luck. At the same time, some people dismissed Texas job creation. There have been some over on the left that said the fact is that those 40% of the jobs created in America since the 9th of June, or excuse me, since the June of 2009 was just luck. Well, Mr. President, America's crisis is not bad luck. It's bad policies from Washington, D.C. Jobs come by keeping taxes low, by controlling spending, by reforming tort laws and ensuring that regulations are fair and predictable. President Obama's policies, which he claims reversed the recession, increased unemployment, they exploded the debt, and they led to the first downgrade of credit in our country's history. Now, apparently, his new economic plan is to create an agency for jobs. We need new jobs. We don't need new agencies. We don't need a government solution. We need the private sector getting to work and getting the government out of their way. If you want to stimulate the economy, you let small businesses and employers across all economic sectors keep more of what they make. That's the way you stimulate the economy. And here's another thing that we do in Texas, and we do, or I should say, here's another thing that they need to do to really send a message across this country that you can be free to risk your capital and have a good chance to get a return on that investment. And yesterday I talked about freezing all of the federal regulations for a 6-month period of time. You know, it's this regulatory overkill that is, it's a serious threat to investor confidence and growth. You know, there's been this tension between Washington regulators and employers. And I will tell you that the situation, Governor, is rapidly deteriorating. In 2010, the Obama administration implemented some 43 new regulations that cost businesses more than $26 billion in this country. Now, here's an example. New efficiency standards for residential water heaters. And that's getting down in the weeds. But the fact of the matter is, it's those types of regulations, heating equipment, pool heaters. It's going to cost businesses, and in particular, it's going to cost their customers $1.3 billion. The new standards will raise the price of the typical water heater by $120. I mean, that's just one example of almost a book full of examples of the regulations that are strangling the economy of America today. And it's not just these new regulations that are causing employers to keep money in reserve and instead of investing it in the economy. It's the threat of regulations to come. It's the uncertainty that's out there, and particularly from Obamacare. They see this coming down the tracks, this monstrous cost to them. It's a takeover of 1/6 of the economy of the United States, and it must be repealed. You know, the President's rhetoric of change just doesn't match his record of change. You know, what they sold us in 2008, they haven't delivered. It's no wonder that businesses are holding money in reserve, not putting it in the economy. As Governor of Texas, we've led with a few simple principles, Governor. Principle number one is don't spend all of the money. And number two is have a tax structure in place that is as low as you can keep it and still be able to deliver the needed services. Have a regulatory climate that is fair and predictable. It's so important to have that predictability in the regulatory climate. And obviously the last is to have a legal system that doesn't allow for frivolous lawsuits. As a matter of fact, just this last spring, we added to our substantial tort reform in the state of Texas by passing a simple but powerful concept called loser pays. You know, over the years, you may. You know, over the years, we've followed this recipe to produce the strongest economy in the country. Since June of 2009, 40%, as I said earlier, of all the jobs in America were created in Texas. And you know, it's time to do the same thing in our federal government. And those simple principles will work as well in Washington, D.C. as they do in the state of Texas. It's time to put a limit and simplify our taxes. We have to quit spending money that we don't have. We need to get our fiscal house in order. We need to restore our good credit. In New Hampshire, you know what works. It's what's called the New Hampshire Advantage. And it involved this Republican legislature cutting spending instead of raising taxes because of you, because of those courageous legislators. You have the best economy in New England. To make it even better, I would suggest you override the veto of the governor so that you become a right-to-work state. You know, yesterday, the President said I needed to watch what I say. I just want to respond back, if I may. Mr. President, actions speak louder than words. My actions as governor are helping create jobs in this country. The President's actions are killing jobs in this country. It's time to get America working again. Thank you all for coming, and let's open it up for a few questions if we can. Yeah.
The governor is going to take some questions. I just ask that if you do ask a question, that you just identify yourself.
Yeah. And I'll repeat them. I'll repeat the question so everybody can hear back, even in the back.
Maybe I could just start off with the first question. The governor, the Congress, and the President in the last several weeks in the summer been debating lifting the cap, the debt ceiling.
Right.
If you were President, would you have signed that piece of
legislation?
legislation?
If I was President, it would never have come to that. So the theoretical side of it is, if I were, cut, cap, and balance. Nikki Haley, Governor Haley and I from South Carolina wrote a editorial together in the weeks while that was going on, and we clearly laid out the case for cutting spending, capping that ceiling, and then passing a balanced budget amendment. And no, I would not have signed it. I think the idea, listen, we got to quit spending money. I mean, this is not rocket science here. Spending money we don't have continues to put more debt upon young women like Alex sitting right here. I mean, the idea that we're going to spend more money that we don't have, I think is counter to, it sends the wrong message to every part of the economy. Yes, sir.
Governor, my name is Wayne Last Prince. My question is about sort of what you started off with, honoring our veterans. I have two brothers that are serving. I have a dad who's a 100% disabled veteran. And we've been at war for 10 years, and a lot of young men and women are coming home, and they need our help. There's been some discussion in Congress now about reorganizing retirement for military folks, and the issue of the VA is a constant one. I wonder what your thoughts are on honoring the service of our men and women in uniform when they come home.
Well, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but the fact that I am a veteran, Anita and I, we chose the Wounded Warrior Project to be the recipient of our inaugural proceeds that we had. We work not only in a public way, but also in a private way to support those young men and women who are coming home, some who have been deployed 4 and 5 times. And I don't know how many times your son's been deployed, but multiple times for these kids. And they're just, I can't tell you how magnificent they are. I've traveled to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times, and they're selfless, they're sacrificial, and for us not to take care of them. And I will suggest to you that the way that we have to get our economy working again, get America working again, and give the, lower the taxes and the regulatory impact on these job creators. And I know what Americans do. They roll up their sleeve and they go to work. They risk their capital. You give people an opportunity to have a return on their investment, and they will get out there and create jobs that in turn create the wealth. I mean, I know it works because that's what we've done in the state of Texas. That job creation engine is so powerful. And for us to have the resources coming into the federal government so that we can appropriately fund the programs for our veterans, you've got to be able to do that. You can talk about all the programs that you want and how you support them and what have you, but if you don't have the money to be able to put into those programs, and I suggest again, whether we're going to have an economy that is strong enough so that we have the offensive and the tactical platforms in place so that people around the world know that America is strong militarily, we've got to get this economy back. I mean, that is the issue in front of us as a country. And I know there's going to be a lot of diversionary talk and what have you, but at the end of the day, we have to get America back working again. So, you know, making sure that the VA, Anita and I worked with a young man who was discharged, and he wasn't medically discharged, 100% disabled, and he needed some substantial help, and you know, just working to get the military to understand, oh, we made a mistake here. Took 6 months of the governor of Texas calling up, you know, the governor well, former governor of Mississippi, Secretary Mabus. But I mean, those are the types of focus that we've had on our veterans, and there's not a group of young men and women that deserve our focus, our thanks, and our support than our active duty military, who then become our veterans. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming today, Governor.
Yes.
My question refers back to when you mentioned about business taxes. Can you explain to me why GE should be allowed to pay lower tax rate than myself?
I can't explain that. I mean, that's as easy as it gets. But the fact of the matter is that the idea that just because you have a good relationship with the political world in Washington, D.C., and just because you get chosen to be on the governor's business council is not a good enough reason that you're not paying your fair share of taxes. When small businessmen and women are struggling to keep their doors open, and you've got corporate entities like GE, and listen, that's a great company, and they have some incredible projects, but the idea that they're not paying their fair share from the standpoint of corporate taxes, and it's what we need to do is go back in and look at our tax code. We need to simplify it, lower the impact on people. You know, I will suggest, I was talking to Representative Scott of South Carolina 10 days ago, I believe, and he has a piece of legislation that lowers, broadens it, heading towards a fair tax. That's one of the ideas that's out there. I'm not saying it's the right idea, but it's heading in the right direction from my perspective, that we have a national conversation about our tax structure and how we simplify it, and frankly how we lower it. And here's another issue from my perspective: corporate profits that are offshore, that we tax at 35%. I mean, we know for a fact that money's not coming back. They're going to leave that offshore. So why not look at and talk about how you repatriate those dollars and have those dollars focused on job creation, but allow them to come back in at a substantially lower rate than 35%, say something like, if it's clearly going for job creation, like 0, to get this economy working again. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Laurel
Kathy.
with Phillips Healthcare, and I also chair the New England Council's Healthcare Committee. And there's a lot of things we can't always agree on, but one thing that the committee really has sort of come together is that the need for medical malpractice reform. And it's something in healthcare that wasn't addressed, and it's something that's driving up costs and keeping physicians, not giving them the ability to maintain their own practices, which is just too expensive. I know you've addressed this in Texas, and we've heard from a lot of physicians there that's really made a difference for them.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I just wanted to ask you to address that issue from a federal perspective.
Medical malpractice, obviously something that is really, Texas was I'll use the words of the Wall Street Journal. We were a judicial hellhole back in the early 90s. We started addressing tort reform in 1995 with some good steps in the right direction, but in 2003 is when we really made the big impact in Texas, and we put in place some serious protections against frivolous lawsuits. We capped non-economic damages, for instance, where the doctor, hospital, or the nursing homes would be protected from these just monstrously out of sight settlements. And there were a lot of people who said, you know, this is not going to work. It's going to limit people's access to health care. It's going to limit people's access to the courthouse. And none of those things came true. None of them. I'll tell you what did come true. What one of the results was. This last year, 21,000 more physicians practicing medicine in Texas because they know they can come there and do what they love and not be sued frivolously. What a powerful message. Some 30 counties in Texas that didn't have an emergency room doc have one today. Counties along the Rio Grande, which were some of those really litigious counties, where women were having to travel for miles and miles outside of the county to find an OBGYN, to see prenatal type care. And today they have that type. That's the result of medical malpractice reform, tort reform, that really matters and really makes a difference. And people still have their access to the courthouse. They still have the ability to go in front of a jury trial, but we protect it against the frivolous suits, and it's very important. I think that has to be done state by state. Federal courts and federal law tort reform, certainly. I support that, and I hope there are members of the legislature that will come forward with those types of programs. But state tort reform does not need to come from Washington, D.C. Yes, sir.
Governor, thank you for coming. My name is Steve Canid, and we followed Texas as a role model in its reform of the judicial system in many ways, community-based programs as an alternative to various incarceration. One of the most inefficient and ineffective programs that government runs is capital punishment. Is there any, can you foresee a point at which we decide it's just not worth it?
Well, again, I think that's a state-by-state issue, and that it's really interesting to have the conversations about all of these different issues that people think a constitutional amendment needs to be passed for. If there are enough people in America and enough states that believe capital punishment needs to be prohibited across the country, then that will happen. If not, then state by state they will make that decision. In the state of Texas, our citizens have clearly said that they support, by overwhelming majority, capital punishment. So I just lay it out there as an issue for Americans, and state by state, and if they want to pass a constitutional amendment, I will suggest to you I'm going to work a whole lot harder on a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution than I am a constitutional amendment to ban capital punishment. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor, for coming to our state. Jim Rubens.
Yes, sir.
You wrote in your recent book that global warming is a contrived, phony mess that is falling apart under its own weight, and that Earth is experiencing a cooling trend. On the other hand, the National Academy of Sciences, an independent body of our nation's most esteemed scientists, have concluded that fossil fuel combustion is the primary cause of warming. And every month since 1985, every month we've seen the Earth warmer than the 20th century average. That's the hockey stick. My question is, if observed scientific data and the National Academy of Sciences are both wrong on an issue involving thousands of scientists and an issue as prominent as global warming, doesn't this call into question the entire science discovery process that forms the foundation of 100 years of America's technological preeminence?
You may have a point there, because I do believe that the issue of global warming has been politicized. I think that there are a substantial number of scientists who have manipulated data so that they will have dollars rolling into their projects, and I think we're seeing it almost weekly or even daily. Scientists who are coming forward and questioning the original idea that man-made global warming is what is causing the climate to change. Yes, our climate's changed. They've been changing for ever since the Earth was formed. But I do not buy into that a group of scientists who have, in some cases, found to be manipulating this information. And the cost to the country and to the world of implementing these anti-carbon programs is in the billions, if not trillions of dollars at the end of the day. And I don't think, from my perspective, that I want America to be engaged in spending that much money on still a scientific theory that has not been proven, and from my perspective is more and more being put into question. Yes, sir.
In light of the terrible debt that the country has right now, just notwithstanding the unfunded liabilities for entitlements, most of the debt in this country can be traced to, it wasn't a problem until there was a Federal Reserve System. And I'm just wondering if
I got in trouble about talking about the Federal Reserve yesterday. So.
Would you be
I got lectured about that yesterday.
I'm just trying to wonder if you would be an advocate of at least auditing the Federal Reserve.
Yes, I think there have been a number of candidates that have stood up over the course of the months and really questioned the transparency of the Federal Reserve, and absolutely, whether you're the governor of a state, whether you're the President of the United States, whether you're head of the agency, or if you know, an independent branch of government, or not a branch of government, but an agency of government like the Federal Reserve, they should open their books up. They should be transparent so the people of the United States know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and frankly, I think if the mistrust that is there today, if they would simply open up and be transparent with the American people, I think it would go a long way towards either finding out whether or not there is some activities that are improper, or that they've been handling themselves quite well. But until they do that, I think there will continue to be questions about their activity and what their true goal is for the United States. Yes, sir.
Governor, thank you very much for coming to New Hampshire. In federal fiscal year 2007, the annual deficit was $200 billion. The total GDP was $14.2 trillion. Today, fiscal year 2011, the annual deficit is $1.6 trillion, and the GDP is $14.2 trillion. Basically, we've been in a holding pattern since the end of the last Republican budget. As president, what will you do about fixing that problem?
Yes, sir. Obviously, excuse me, working with the House of Representatives and the Senate, you know, I'm a little biased here, but I hope we pick up 20 or 30 more seats in the U.S. House and run the table and have 60 Republican senators to work with. That would make it a lot easier from my perspective. And then working with those two legislative bodies to put a budget in place that is balanced and start freeing up the private sector to create the wealth that it's going to take to pay off that, I think, close to $16 trillion national debt. But if the legislature, for whatever reason, does not agree that that's the way that we should go, a president has one other very powerful tool, and that's his pen to veto spending bills. And I love this country enough to wear out the ink in a veto pen if that's what it takes to send the message that we are not going to spend money that we do not have, because our children's future is more important than that. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Governor Perry. My name is Laura Cousins. I'm a Blue Star Mother of the United States Marine, and I'm an advocate in New Hampshire matters of health. And I note in your opening remarks you referenced our state motto, live free or die. And in New Hampshire, I think we very much do value our freedoms and our individual liberties. And if you value those as well, I was wondering how you reconcile that value with your executive order to mandate medical treatment, specifically the Gardasil vaccine on the little girls of Texas. And if that was a mistake, Governor, how then you reconcile your recent support of legislation where the state of Texas now mandates medical treatment, specifically the meningitis vaccine for college students up to age 30, whether they reside on campus or not.
My wife is a registered nurse. Her father is a physician of 52 plus years. Both my parents are cancer survivors, and I hate cancer. We passed a piece of legislation in Texas in 2007, the same year that I signed that executive order, to invest $3 billion over the next 10 years to find the cures for cancer. The Gardasil issue for me was one of cancer, and I made a mistake, clearly, in how we put that forward without working with the legislature. But it did create not only a firestorm, but it also created a conversation between parents, mothers and their daughters that I think was really healthy, so that they could make that decision of whether or not they wanted to have access. The legislature clearly sent me the message that that was not the way that they wanted to go. I respected that, and I still respect it today. But the idea that we've got diseases that are killing our children, and that we have proven vaccines like the one for meningitis, and that we're not making it available, I think is unconscionable. I do think that it is our responsibility to take care of the citizens of our states. And again, it's a state issue, and the Texas legislature agreed with that, and I signed that piece of legislation. So if you don't want to do that in New Hampshire, I respect that. But in Texas, we think it's important to protect our kids against a number of diseases, and we mandate vaccines for those, but it goes through the legislative process. I learned a good lesson about not getting out in front of the legislature too far. Yes, ma'am.
Karen Testerman. You spoke of private sector as opposed to the government as the source of bringing our economy back in line. I'm wondering how and what your plan is to remove and transition the heavy government involvement in non-constitutional matters into the private sector.
It's not going to happen. Her question was, how do you remove the regulatory impact that is very pervasive throughout our economy, and how do you move our country back towards a more federalist type of an approach? Is that a fair way to? Right. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes. In my book that he referenced, Fed Up, thank you, sir, You can find that at Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com. And actually, the proceeds go to a public policy foundation in Texas. It doesn't come to me. So, but I talk about that in the book, that we really have gotten away from our roots, and that the government, and particularly the centralized government. Thank you, centralized government, and look, it's human nature to acquire more power, whether it's in a state or whether it's at a county or a city level. People tend to accumulate power, and we just need to wean ourselves away from that. For instance, on the regulatory side, if I'm so blessed to be elected President of the United States, there will be men and women going into those agencies that are clearly pro-business advocates, and that they will bring that philosophy with them. I think that's one of the things that is missing in Washington, D.C. We almost have an anti-business climate there, whether it's the EPA or the Department of Labor. The idea that the National Labor Relations Board would stop a company like Boeing from going into a right-to-work state like South Carolina is beyond me. I mean, that is, if you need just a bumper sticker snapshot of what's wrong with this administration, that is a great one. And so I'm a pro-business governor. I don't make any apologies to anyone about that. I'm going to be a pro-business president, and I'm not going to apologize for anybody for that. I think that is the future of America, that we get this country working again. Yes, sir, in the back. You get the last question, sir. Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for coming. I wanted to raise a question about the debt and deficit reduction ideas that are afoot in Washington. One of them, unfortunately, is to cut back on incentives for retirement savings. Needless to say, we think these are the seed corn of our future, the fuel that will help the economy grow. Could you tell us a little bit about your views on retirement savings and whether they should be protected and not cut?
Yes, sir. Simply put, I agree with your position. I think that should be, there should be incentives out of government for specific things, whether it's energy and the trying to get this country more energy independent. I mean, I think you should have a conversation nationally about how we give incentives to those. I think we need to give incentives to our citizens for their savings, so that they can become more thrifty, more personally responsible. So incentives work. I think obviously we'll have a great and broad conversation about which ones are right and which ones are not. But the fact of the matter is, people respond to incentives. We use them in the state of Texas to help bring businesses there to compete with other states, and I think that is fine, and we should be thoughtful. As I said earlier, as I will wrap up, that those offshore profits that are being taxed at 35%, we should give those companies an incentive to bring that money back onshore to the United States to create jobs. Thank you all for letting me come and be a part of this today. God bless you. Oh, good, good. Well, if I'd have had that, I'd have been drinking out of it. All right. Thank you.
Good job, Governor. Good job. Okay. Just want to present, first of all, I just want to thank the Governor for taking time out of his very, very busy schedule to stop by here and the Politics and Eggs. We wish him much success and good health as he journeys through the great state of New Hampshire. As he said, he's going to spend a great deal of time here, so I'm sure he's going to be spending a lot of time maybe drinking coffee, and I couldn't think of a better gift than a Texas-sized mug of Politics and Eggs. All right, Governor? Good luck.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right.
Bank of America, we will help you out.
Those are priceless. Yes, right. Those are priceless. I hope so. David, we working our way back out. What do you want to do? You're going to walk out the same way and then...
Thanks for coming down. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Senator, I'm honored to meet you.
All right.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for training her well.
Hi, Governor. Would you mind signing me today?
I'll tell you what, I got a...
You got a better pen?
Well, it just fits in my hands.
Oh, lovely.
You're my hero. Take that. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Will you walk with me?
I will.
As we're working
I
our way
can.
towards the door. And I'll sign. Your birthday's March 4th? Yes, sir. You did your birthday. 20 years ago. Man, it's cool. I hear that it is over there. I like it.
Republican presidential candidate Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, campaigning in New Hampshire. This is how WMUR-TV in Manchester covered his day.
Governor Perry?
Before a politics and eggs crowd that was larger than it's been in some time, Governor Perry wasted little time in putting President Obama's fiscal policies in his Texas crosshairs.
1 in 6 work-eligible Americans cannot find a full-time job. That is not a recovery. That is an economic disaster.
After a little Q&A on topics ranging from healthcare mandates to global warming, it was off to the Nashua company Resonetics. And after meeting with employees and business leaders, we sat down with Perry to discuss, among other things, his devout Christian faith.
Well, I'll just simply say, I'm a big believer in the 10 Commandments, and which one of those you got a problem with. And, my faith is part of my life.
On the economy, Perry says he would follow the template that he built in Texas. And he didn't back off comments made this week where he said if Treasury Secretary Ben Bernanke printed more money, it's akin to treason.
Quit printing money, quit devaluing our dollars, and let's get back to what we know works. Cut taxes, cut the regulations, cut out the frivolous lawsuits, get America working again.
As for the rest of the Republican field, he would only say take a look at his record and decide for yourself. But he also promises to spend a lot of time here in New Hampshire, and he says he looks forward to mixing it up.
I don't really trust many people that don't have an opinion. So New Hampshire folks and Granite Staters, they got opinions.